Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, workers, shirkers, and shadow lurkers, welcome along to the Joe Spiver YouTube channel where we discuss books and little else. And you join me, chaps and chapettes, in the dumps slightly. I was telling you last time how bloody hot it was, seasonally anyway, for in the UK, and you now join me in the heart of winter. The cold has come, and the usual sort of odd commuter that comes one way and goes back the other way they've all had their umbrellas levelled as if rifles against the oncoming wind, going one way, and then obviously they've been having other issues coming back the other. Obviously, there are geopolitical tribulations afoot in the Middle East, and of course that has meant that some arrogant and irresponsible and argumentative politicos here in Britain and in many other Western liberal democracies have saw fit to plonk their political heft on one side of the political seesaw or the other, and haven't relented, and it's the most ungainly thing going on at the moment. In slightly lesser news, the English cricket team are not doing fantastically over at the ODI World Cup in India. Chelsea Association Football Club are in the bottom half of the Premier League. Me and my useful handmaid earlier on were declaring war on the washing machine because we were watching it like a television. That's not working either anymore. Things are going terribly. But nevertheless, we plough on. So you join me for our fourth episode of... Episode, Joe? Come on. Your fourth instalment of Victober, the month on our lovely community in BookTube where we discuss and dissect and just talk about our favourites of the Victorian period, 1837 to 1901 roughly. Fourth instalment today, and it is, George Eliot's Romola, a story of ambition and duplicity and the inevitable fallout when ambition and duplicity then butt heads, and things like that. Our eponymous Romola is the selfless, and yet she's the selfless, graceful, honourable, and yet dangerously a girl dangerously ignorant of much harm that might come to her. She is the daughter of a blind scholar, and our tale starts originally with her soon-to-be husband. It's the meeting and the marriage, and then the eventual separation of a couple that ought never really to have been brought together. So we start really with a shipwrecked stranger, who we soon learn to be called Tito Melema, who has arrived in Florence. We soon learn as a result of a weird accident at sea in which he was with his adoptive father, and is now on the shores of Florence. He's picked up by Bratti, who is a charming and very cleverly dishonest market stallsman who sells, all number of trinkets. And he's taken to the market, and there is public furor about the recent death of Lorenzo de' Medici. So it's set. I ought to announce also. It is set late 15th century, so 14. I believe it starts in 1492. For a good few years, Lorenzo de' Medici has risen to the position of statesman, and he has financed and helped the rejuvenation of Florentine art and all of the things that are greatly associated with that particular epoch of Florence. And this book tends to come, or came, at least for me, when I announced that I was going to be reading it on here, a few of you commented saying, "Go careful, it might not be Miss Eliot at her finest," yada yada. And also when I researched it on the internet as well, a lot of trigger warnings for this. A lot of people saying, if you liked Middlemarch, you might not necessarily like this. This wasn't her at her best. But I think a lot of the criticism and a lot of the weaknesses drawn from it are that it's written by somebody 1862, reflecting on a time in 1492, and so there is a lot of temporal distance between you and the work. But it's that very weird modern malady that I find in lots of, especially some of my peers at university, that struggle to suspend disbelief or be at all interested in somebody that hadn't had an upbringing and life and experience exactly like theirs. So unless a story was written about a disillusioned adolescent who had just that morning gone to collect the post from the postman and the milk from the milkman, and had gone to the local convenience store and was having troubles at home, unless it is a story exactly panning out like that, they are not interested in it. Thankfully, I do not care really for works like that. I take them as I can get them, but I don't mind reading about other people. And so, yes, Tito Malema, in the market, has heard of the death of Lorenzo de' Medici and goes over and sees a small girl called Tessa, who is what essentially amounts to a waif. She is an assistant at a market. She gives Tito his first bit of Florentine sustenance. She gives him a big jug of milk and he downs it. And she's very taken with him, as are all, because he is, as I say, initially charming and charismatic and clearly intelligent. And the number one characteristic, actually, that gets him through many doors in his first few days as essentially a vagrant in Florence is a rather arresting ring that he has on his finger. It's a big, I think it's a red ring that he has on his finger, that Bratti, the merchant in the market, notices is of peculiar value, given that it's on the finger of somebody who appears to have not very much in the world to his name. And so he is introduced to Nello, who is a hairdresser who acquaints him very well with much of the Florentine culture, says that there is a little bit of prejudice against Greeks, because it's revealed that, or Tito tells us, that he is of Greek ancestry. And he says to Nello, essentially, I've got a few things to sell, as it were. I've got a few gems on my person. Have you any idea where I may find the appropriate clientele that can pay me for such items? And Nello says, yeah, I've got a good few mates for you, buddy. And that is, I believe, how he goes on to meet, at the Via de' Bardi, he meets a blind scholar who is capable and has clearly sacrificed much of his life to the difficulty of his craft. He has spent essentially his life between the pages of a book. Not necessarily all that much of a recommendable thing to be doing. But he is nonetheless a little bit resentful of those who've perhaps sacrificed academic individuality so as to become famous. So he's not famous, but he believes himself to have been truthful and true to a cause, and so he's a little bit resentful of many others who've achieved fame in Florence, scholarly fame in Florence. And he has at his side a really rather arresting daughter called Romola, and he also has, or had, a son that has very, very scandalously, in that household, turned to the church, found a theological calling, and has left. And Tito's quite taken with Romola. Romola's quite taken with Tito. It's all excellent and it's all good. He then meets Fra Luca, who is, we are led to believe, it is soon revealed that is, Fra Luca is the abandoned son of Bardi, and he says, "Oh mate, I've been given instructions from someone to look for a black tousle-haired Greek-Italian man with a big shining ring on his finger, and you seem to fit that description. I've come to tell you, great news, good news, everyone. Your father is alive. He's enslaved currently, but he is obviously his ransom can be paid with the proceeds from the sale of all of your gems that you've got on you. How good is that? Wow. I've come to give you that message. Sell your gems, and then you can pay for his release, and all will be well. And then, ladies and gentlemen, is our first introduction to Tito, the scheming weasel, the sort of wriggling manipulator that wants nothing but to shirk responsibility and only seeks self-advancement and self-improvement. He somehow manages to rationalise in his head that he doesn't need to go and see his father, that his father is probably dead, even though he's just been told that his father's probably alive. And he, as I say, rationalises and says, I'm going to focus on myself, which again resonates with a very modern audience in that it's time for self-care, and I ought not to be conscious of the well-being of others. I'm going to propel myself to the top of anything that can be. And then Bardi, after much, he essentially, Tito and Bardi form a little bit of a working partnership together. They work on scholarly texts and books, and that's how Romola and Tito become even more entangled. Tito then quickly becomes one of the darlings, or not one of the darlings, but one of the useful middlemen in Florentine politics. He sooner or later becomes a go-between and a duplicitous, treacherous, awful person that somehow manages to please three sides of the political sphere, and just manages to worm his way into camps, to one camp, and then worms his way into the other enemy's camp, and manages somehow to balance those books really well for quite some time. In the background of all this, there is a gentleman called Savonarola, I'm getting that right, I think, who is the main man of the frate. He's a big churchgoer. He sermonizes and does all sorts of typically religious things, and has under him a big bunch of nodding, approving people who see him as a prophet and as somebody who rightly has predicted the gloom of Florence that will come. There is the Italian-French wars of the time, where Charles VIII of France comes in, and this seems to vindicate Savonarola's predictions. As the French wade in, they're heavily aided by other large forces in Italy that want Florence for their own gain, and before long there is an event called the Bonfire of Vanities, I believe, where young men under Savonarola's control are sent among the streets to essentially gather everybody's belongings that they hold dear and put them on a bonfire and burn them for, I don't know, the betterment of society or something. Obviously, they're very ascetic, very self-abnegatory. And it's unclear, or it's not unclear, but it's widely debated in Florence as to whether Mr. Savonarola is simply just pleasing a baying mob, or is actually acting out of real zeal and strength and interest in the revelation of a god. Things don't go well, essentially, but it's George Eliot. This was written before Middlemarch. Obviously, I think it was Adam Bede that, as it were, got her famous, and this is one of the works in her sort of middle period where you sense she doesn't quite know where she's going to find a voice yet. It's a little bit moralising. She's a little bit too much like Savonarola for my liking. She seems to want to lecture her readership. There's a bit too much finger wagging in this for my liking, rather than Middlemarch, which, whilst taking moral sides on one side or the other slightly, doesn't let that hinder the procession of the novel. Whereas this, it tends to get a bit sticky when the author, when she tries to intervene and say, "Oh, look how bad this person is. Oh, look how good this person is. Oh, look what this person's going through." There's a little bit too much of that instruction, and as I say, that finger wagging that drew me to Middlemarch, that the lack of which drew me to Middlemarch. But yeah, beautiful prose, done really well. I've got a few sections to highlight here that I particularly liked. I think what Eliot does best is minimal personal interaction, rather than these grand political movements and all of the political sacrifices and searchings of the time. I think she's just much better at, here's a person who is meeting another person that they quite like, here are their predispositions, here is a short encapsulation of their life leading up to that point and why they either get along or don't. So we have, one of the first sections here is of the market, the Florentine market, where because there's such a maelstrom about Lorenzo de' Medici's death, lots of the merchants have left their stalls, and for the pilferers in the land, it's high time to go about nicking, and so she very nicely encapsulates that. So if we'll listen in, folks. In this general distraction, the Florentine boys, who were never wanting in any street scene, and were of an especially mischievous sort, as who should say, very sour crabs indeed, saw a great opportunity. Some made a rush at the nuts and dried figs, others preferred the farinaceous delicacies at the cooked provision stalls, to take kindly to lantern fare, applied a discriminating nostril, and then disappeared with much rapidity under the nearest shelter, while the mules, not without some kicking and plunging among impeding baskets, were stretching their muzzles towards the aromatic green meat. You see how the dogs and the mules and the people and the scroungers there are essentially equalised. We have our next section that I wanted to highlight here, which focuses on our first meeting of Romola as somebody who has constantly been at the side of her father and has never thought once about her own personal desires or what she might want to achieve in the world. And yeah, it's beautiful. So here we go again. She was standing by him at her full height in quite majestic self-possession when the visitors entered, and the most penetrating observer would hardly have divined that this proud, pale face, at the slightest touch on the fibres of affection or pity, could become passionate with tenderness, or that this woman, who imposed a certain awe on those who approached her, was in a state of girlish simplicity and ignorance concerning the world outside her father's books. So you can see there how she mixes opposites very, very well. Not in the rather childish and often recherche and silly way that Dickens would do, but as I say, she gets complications and contradictions fused very well together to show how, frankly, three-dimensional real people would exist. And then our third section is when, also worth mentioning, Tito, in a fit of really absent-mindedness and short-term weirdness, marries Tessa, who is the small girl that he has kept slight contact with in the market and who he will father two children by. And the only reason that he likes Tessa is because she doesn't require anything of him. She gives him love and affection that Romola does and admiration without him having to break into a sweat, basically. And this is the moment when he at first sort of bats her off after the weird first marriage. But Tito's mind was just now thoroughly penetrated with a hopeful first love associated with all happy prospects flattering to his ambition, and that future necessity of grieving Tessa could be scarcely more to him than the far-off cry of some little suffering animal buried in the thicket to a merry cavalcade in the sunny plain. Essentially, his self-advancement and improvement and his own inclusion in all of the importance of Florentine politics heavily trumps the despondency of one girl that he's hurt, which shows how much of a selfish git he is. But don't worry, folks, he gets his comeuppance. And then the third section I wanted to highlight was... what the hell is this? He was a producer of mad consciousness, solitude, pensive of rage. Oh, this is Baldassare. I'm glad that I was reminded of that. Baldassare is Tito's father, who comes to Florence and is seen of as a prisoner. And when Tito is a little bit more prominent in Florentine politics, his father comes as a prisoner on the steps of the Duomo. A big thing. You go on Trivago and you type in Florence, and the big Duomo will come up. That's what it's inextricably linked with Florence. And on the steps of the Duomo, his father's there, and they both recognise each other, and they say he's an escaped prisoner at that point, and one of Tito's associates says, "Who's that idiot? Why is he clutching at your leg?" And Tito looks at his adopted father, who has cared for him since the day of his birth, and, as he always refers to, slept on stone so that he could sleep on a pillow. Looks at him in the eyes and says, "Oh, he's a madman, criminal madman, no idea what he's doing, get him away from me." And Baldassare, for the entirety of the novel, seeks vengeance in many different ways. And so this is an encapsulation of Baldassare's rage at his son. He was reduced to a sort of mad consciousness that he was a solitary pulse of just rage in a world filled with defiant baseness. He had clutched and unsheathed his dagger, and for a long while had been feeling its edge, his mind narrowed to one image and the dream of one sensation, the sensation of plunging that dagger into a base heart which he was unable to pierce in any other way. That's very nice as well. And then we have our final section, which is based on Bratti, who is the first person we meet who originally recognised Tito as the shipwrecked stranger with the lovely red ring on his finger. And this is one of the hallmarks of great writers, as I've mentioned before, is those who just the relatively minor characters that essentially bring in juice every now and then, pop the kettle on, do the laundry, put the children to bed, go out for the evening saunter, who do comparatively little, and yet about whom you want to know much, much more, because you can easily see how a narrative pivoting around them might easily be developed. So this is Bratti, who is the merchant in the market, and at this point, Savonarola, the proselytizer, has been called into question, and there are pamphlets distributed about whether he should be hung, whether he should be put on trial, and whether he should be whether he should seek to prove his own fertiloquence. And so Bratti is using this uncertainty to all of his economic advantage. So she was too familiar with the humble life of Florence for Bratti to be any stranger to her, and turned towards him. She said, "Have you two sorts of handbills, Bratti? Well, let me have them quickly." So 2 handbills are being distributed throughout Florence. "2 sorts," said Bratti, separating the wet sheets with the slowness that tried Romola's patience. "There's law and there's justice." "Oh, which sort do you sell most of?" "Or justice. Justice goes the quickest. So I raised the price and made it 2 denarii. But then I bethought law was good ware too, and had as good a right to be charged for as justice. For people set no store by cheap things, and if I sold the law at 1 denaro, I should be doing it wrong. And I'm a fair trader. Law or justice, it's all one to me. They're all good wares. I got them both for nothing, and I sell them at a fair profit. But you'll want more than one of a sort." And so you get these devious idiots, essentially, or these completely devious people that are distributing information to Florentines at different prices, and so which will obviously heavily influence much of the discussion around Savonarola and the life of one human being. So yeah, I didn't like it as much as Middlemarch. Obviously, that would be almost impossible. There's, as I say, a little too much moralising, a little too much of George Eliot on her soapbox shouting, but all beautifully done. Most of it, anyway, beautifully done. It's a bit garrulous in places. She does tend to go on, but we're a fan of that on this YouTube channel, as I'm sure you're aware. Next Victober book will be Barchester Towers, which will, unfortunately, folks, break our chronological theme. This was written in 62, and Barchester Towers is written in, I think, 54. So, unfortunately, much to our dismay, we will not carry on with that. But I loved the start of the Barchester series so much, The Warden, last time, so I'm going to go for Barchester Towers now and continue that. So that'll be with you hopefully early next week. Again, another enormous thank you. You've all been unbelievably nice with your comments. As I say, I'm just a stupid idiot that goes on a little bit too much, and I'm just a pompous git that wears quarter zips and thinks rather too highly of himself, and reads weird books, but you seem to enjoy it, so thank you all so very much. Steve Donahue, if you happen to be watching, thank you for doing my university tag. Me and Neil Spivey are doing very well together. So yeah, any relationship tribulations, if you're struggling to live in a homosexual relationship, guys, please do let me know. But yeah, thank you all so much for the commendations in the comments. Thank you all so much for subscribing. But yeah, this is I've been overawed by the welcoming aspect of the BookTube community. I'm enjoying all of your content as well. Lots of you guys are doing some really nice stuff, which I enjoy watching. So yeah, thanks very much, guys. I will see you in the next video.